A great night to be here. People are flocking in. We're going to do half an hour on the US and 45 minutes on Yemen. So I hope that's what you're expecting. Panel, I wonder if you could kindly introduce yourself, just a minute each, and your headline, even your word about the US election. I haven't told the panel this. Starting with you, Bill Barnard, at the end.
I'm Bill Barnard. I'm chair of Democrats Abroad UK. I used to say I was a Democrat by inheritance, passing out flyers for Adlai Stevenson in 1952 with my father. But by 1960, I was a Democrat by persuasion, campaigning for John Kennedy in the American South. I've been a political commentator and political analyst for some time, 5 Democratic conventions, 2 as a member of my state delegation, 3 as a political commentator, 2 Republican conventions as a political commentator. That's probably enough.
Okay, and your word to sum up the election, or your sentence?
I'll take an unusual one. Politics as usual.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. It's great to hear of that experience. What rubber on the road you've got, to use the American expression. Felicity, would you kindly do the same?
Yes, I can't claim quite nearly such an impressive pedigree. I'm Felicity Spector from Channel 4 News. I'm the chief writer and the American politics expert, if you like. I was in America for the 2000 election, 2004, 2008, and the inauguration. So I've been covering it, if you like, for almost a decade. And before that, I maintained a keen interest. I write for the New Statesman online as well as Channel 4 News about American politics. I guess my word for the election this time would be inevitable. And
to you, welcome. Thank you very much. And to you, Tom.
Thanks, Paddy, and thank you all for coming amidst tube chaos. My name's Tom Grant. I'm chairman of Republicans Abroad UK, the UK branch of Republicans Abroad International. I've been in this country off and on since 1995. I was born in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and raised in Massachusetts. Massachusetts Republican is somebody who must have done something very, very bad in a past life. But anyway, that is what I am. I'm a Massachusetts Republican. Take that as you will. I am also a practicing and academic public international lawyer based at the University of Cambridge. To sum up the election, well, it's the biggest House swing since 1946, I think. Bill's the historian. So
1928, actually.
1928. So something historical has happened.
Great. Well, can I start by saying, get over yourself, America. We did this in May. You're power sharing. You've done it before with Clinton and Reagan and Roosevelt. You're a system of checks and balances. What's happened is the public have lost attention after 2 years. This isn't a historic election, it's an election. And there's a head shaking in the audience. So could we start with you? Because it might be more interesting. I'm only chairing. But do the honour of saying who you are, and we'll get the panel's reaction to what you say, not me.
Hi, I'm Brian Condon. The reason I was head shaking is that the system's not the same, so it's not a coalition. What you've seen, Congress has changed, but the House hasn't. So, sorry, the Senate hasn't. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic, because when I was listening in the late night to the radio of all this, the pundits were going on about the expected change in the Senate. Now it seems to me that hasn't happened, and that's interesting. Okay, the House has switched, so I'd be interested in your views on that.
Well, thanks, Paddy. I would say that the expectations were very much in line with the results. We thought there would be a House change. The change is bigger than we thought. We also thought that because the Senate is based on a staggered election system with only 1/3 of the seats exposed to re-election, that there'd be a change, but it wouldn't actually tilt control of the Senate. That's pretty much exactly what we imagined. If 2/3 of the Senate had been up for grabs and the same proportion of change had happened, I think the Senate would also have gone over.
And do the polling results agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Broadly,
yes, they do.
I mean, this is the natural state of affairs for America. It's not normal for the president to control the White House, for the president and the Congress, both houses of Congress, to be from the same party. So, if you like, this has returned to the usual state of affairs in American politics. The American system was set up because it likes compromise. The people are deemed to like politicians who work together to achieve things in the national good rather than being a broadly partisan agenda.
Okay,
but it's peculiar. I thought I'd be the only one offering that particular perspective, but I think we're coming to an unusual agreement. Given all the hoopla about the election and the somewhat bizarre character of the election this time and all the attention that it received, I think we're likely to overinterpret the results. It is a tremendous swing in the House, to be sure, but if you had told me in the year 2000, that in 2010, not knowing who the president was or which party was in power, that America would have divided government, that the president would be of one party, the House of another, that the division in the House would be 240 to 200 or 235 to 200 or thereabouts. I would have said, well, yeah, that's pretty much the norm since World War II. Since World War II, we've had divided government the majority of times. It has worked reasonably well under Eisenhower, under Nixon, under Reagan, under Clinton, and the first Bush. Whether or not it works as well in the next 2 years is another matter, because the divisions are so deep, the feelings so bitter, the candidates, some of them so ideologically oriented and not given to compromise, that we may not enjoy the benefits of divided government, such as they are, as we've had in the past. But as you say, our government is constructed to make change difficult and to ensure that change is largely consensual, because we divide powers by branches of government, levels of government, and now, since World War II, the American people have gotten accustomed to having divided control of the federal government itself, the different branches. And that's a bit unusual in our history, but it's been true for the last 60 years.
And to the back of the room.
Hi, Lucy Williamson, BBC News. I just wondered, Obama was said to be, whatever you thought of him, an amazing communicator. And yet everyone was saying part of the problem in this election was that he failed to communicate what he was doing. What went wrong? Why did he fail to
Felicity?
communicate?
It is astonishing, actually. I mean, I was there, I remember, I was sitting in the gridlock in the traffic just now trying to get here, and I thought the last time I sat in this gridlock was at the inauguration at 3 o'clock in the morning, when it seemed the whole of America was flocking to Washington to sort of take part in this moment of euphoria, and the sort of rhetoric of Barack Obama had helped carry forward a whole generation of people into being engaged with politics again. So it is somewhat surprising that this crack team, so we thought, of Democratic operatives who took power in the White House have sort of managed to let the Republicans frame the entire political debate of the country. They lost complete control of shaping the debate over healthcare, over the financial stimulus, and Barack Obama already was tagged, had this tag of being an elitist and being remote from the people, of failing to kind of empathise enough with the plight of ordinary people. And I think that's what it came across as, that he didn't focus enough on the sheer problems of not having a job and losing your home, and he didn't focus enough on the problems of people who live out in the suburbs and in rural areas who voted Democrat for the first time.
Yeah, Felicity, I mean, last night listening to the news over at one of the networks for several hours in the very small hours.
Don't boast now. Don't boast.
Well, I got the sense that one of the things a lot of people are talking about now is media, the ability of the president to communicate, and there's been a suggestion or a theory is emerging that the results in the elections yesterday are largely consequence. They follow on from a failure of communication, of message packaging. And certainly it is interesting that this president, who 2 years ago seemed like an unstoppable rhetorical force, in the last month or so has been sort of shy and retiring. But I think it'd be a mistake if you overlook the substance. I think there are substantive issues with the agenda over the last 2 years which have concerned voters, and that those too have to be given some, you have to look at those before you reach a conclusion as to what happened yesterday.
Would you briefly list them? Not at great detail,
Sure.
but just
Sure.
follow on.
I think there are concerns about the president's tax policy. I think there are concerns about the approach that's been taken to economic recovery. The president wanted a big recovery package. He got it. Unemployment went up. Now that's substantive. You can package it any way you want, but unemployment's not where it ought to be, and that, I think, concerned a lot of voters.
So we'll come to policy in about 5 minutes. Bill, would you respond to our question about Obama? The great communicator was a great big dud. He lost Illinois. Please don't come to my state. Send your wife, but for goodness sake, don't come yourself.
The administration offers, and those around the president offer, a kind of self-serving explanation, and that is that they were so focused upon achievement that they didn't pay enough attention to the politics. There's an element of truth, a grain of truth there. Those students of the American Congress, the historians and political scientists who've studied, look at this Congress and say it's the most substantively successful in passing legislation since the 1960s, and some would even say since the 1930s. And these are not Democrats who are saying it, these are people like Norm Ornstein of the American Enterprise Institute. And there is a solid record of achievement. And the rhythm that we're about to enter into is not uncommon. That is, the first 2 years of an administration is one when it pushes its domestic agenda, it gets what it can through. The midterm elections occur, there are setbacks. In the last 2 years of the administration, there's greater focus on smaller issues that can be dealt with in a compromised fashion with the opposition, and a concentration on foreign policy. Again, it's a return to politics
Bill,
as usual.
the question is about the president at the moment. He dropped the ball, didn't he?
I do think that the Democrats did an incredibly poor job, quite frankly.
The president.
The president, you've got it, in the end, the buck stops there, as Harry Truman said. I think that's true. In articulating the message and gaining control and shaping the way that people viewed the election.
He's admitted as much just now in his statement this afternoon. He admitted, I didn't tell you enough what I was doing, and I didn't explain enough why we were doing it.
I'm keeping an eye out for you in the room. You're yawning, so you're going to ask the next question. Should we be surprised that in 2 years this guy can go from hero to zero? I mean, is that frightening, or is that normal?
He's not going to hero to zero. The Republicans have gained a significant number of seats, but you have to realize that one of the reasons it seems so tremendous is because the Democratic majority was so huge because of wins in 2006 and 2008. 49 of the 60-some-odd seats that we are losing are districts that were carried by John McCain in an election won by Obama. We held seats that we should not have held, and then we lost those. And the actual
Illinois
as a Senate seat, yes. But Illinois is the seat of Midwestern Republicanism for years and years and years with Everett Dirksen. It's not only a Democratic state.
There's nothing so fickle as an independent voter in the United States either. I mean, these are independents who are behind this Republican victory. The Republicans know just as well as anybody that those people could swing back, and that's why they're so worried by these Tea Party people on the one side. If they have too much influence over the party, they've been behind a lot of the resurgence, a lot of the excitement around it, but they're going to alienate all those independents who this time swung behind the Republicans.
And Felicity, it's the case, isn't it, that American political parties are giant coalitions, much as our own tinky little country has got coalitions within each political party. Do you want to talk about the Tea Party before you go tonight? If not now, before you leave us, because we're leaving you and you're leaving us in 15 minutes.
It's very interesting because American completely different from British political parties. There's no sort of completely coherent whipped MPs who all vote according to the party mandate and so on. There are very conservative Democrats, there are Northwestern Liberal Republicans. They are both broad churches, and that's why, even though the Democrats have a nominal majority in the Senate, a lot of those senators are quite conservative. They don't like a lot of the policies that Barack Obama has been prioritising, and they're worried about their own seats. So it doesn't necessarily follow that he can control his own party. For John Boehner now, a big headache is controlling these new freshmen, very inexperienced, a lot of them, Congress people who've been elected from this Tea Party background. They don't agree with a lot of the mainstream Republican views, and they're not there to compromise with the Democrats. And that is actually the message from the American voters, is that we hate Washington, we don't trust any of you. Approval in exit polls for the Republican Party was 41%. That's lower than approval for Obama. It's not like everyone loves the Republicans. And they know that, and they can't afford to let this extremist wing.
Can I follow up on that and take Tom on one point? He was arguing that there's a substance here rather than something else. It seems to me the substance that's here was sheer frustration. I mean, if you look at the polling results going into the election, Obama was in the mid-40s in approval rates. The Democrats were in the mid to low 30s. The Republicans, for their role in Congress, were in the low 20s. So it's not a victory for the Republicans. Yes, there is substance here that needs to be attended to. That is the feeling of a great number of Americans who are hurting economically. But it's not an endorsement of the Republicans, and those voters will be up for grabs in 2012, and we're going to grab them.
Actually, thanks, Bill. That almost makes the point I would make, and that is, if you look at John Boehner in his statement, it was either this morning or late yesterday. There's no tone of triumphalism in the Speaker designates approach right now. I think very wisely he's taking the view that the new party in Congress, in the House, is going to have to be very workmanlike, very serious, very earnest, and focused on getting things done. And his tone, I think, has been very instructive about the job ahead.
Mitch McConnell has said that his aim is to make Obama a one-term president, which is not the sound
but you were talking
about
Boehner, so I was talking about Boehner too.
But Boehner also said this afternoon that he wanted to repeal healthcare reform and bring back the Bush tax cuts and so on, and it was his agenda that he wanted to prioritise, which is fair enough, having won this election, but it doesn't bode awfully well for forging some kind of united strategy for the next
Well,
next session.
It depends on what you insist on. The problem is, in a competitive political system, we can use that type of language to say the only agreeable thing is to agree with my side. And if the people have voted out the party that put through the health care plan, and all you say is, well, their feelings are hurt, and it's not really that much about substance, not about policy, you could be in for a surprise 2 years from now. Yeah, there might be some, you'll call it gridlock. It could simply instead be an adjustment of policy course. It's a matter of perspective.
On the point of communication, Obama did do surprisingly badly, but I think we have to remember that Reagan and Clinton, who were serious communicators, had exactly the same dips at the same point.
Yeah.
And I think that's just...
And thank you for reminding us of that. They said about Clinton, he gave great funeral. And we know that Reagan was the great communicator. Would you tell us your impression of this election? Would you like to, from the floor, tell us what you think this is?
I think that the fault is in Obama, sadly, because he had an agenda that he should have brought up, which is, okay, this is the way I started, but he should have started a public meeting or a weekly Roosevelt debate, which said, this is our problems, this is where we're going, and he did nothing to bring the country with him.
Yeah, you respond. Can you pass the microphone to our yawning friend? You respond, Bowman.
Oh, but to throw a question back, what should he have told people that they didn't already know?
Now you're going to have to save the answer to that because we've taken the microphone away from you.
I can still speak.
No, you can't. You're not allowed to.
I guess, Paddy, I should firstly point out you rank next to Christopher Hitchens as the only two people who've ever been rude to me in public.
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, but I'm
I'll
the only
forgive
one
you.
who saw the invitation to dress Western, so I'm feeling embarrassed now.
Okay, but a more serious matter. So looking ahead to 2 years' time, presumably there'll be a Tea Party candidate vying for the Republican nomination who can't be accused of being a witch or anything of that nature, is a sort of serious candidate. So how will the sort of general traditional Republican Party deal with that? Will they argue with them on ideological grounds, or what will be the slant of the Republican establishment in trying to preserve a kind of traditional Republican candidate?
Be a bit brief, would you? We'll start with you.
I don't know what you mean by the Republican establishment. You'd have to define the term more specifically before I can answer the question.
More moderate Republicans, let's say.
Okay, well, look, the party is a big tent. We have a lot of different viewpoints. We're going to have a primary process where there'll be at least a half a dozen candidates with serious resources able to go and project their message. They're going to be tested in debates, and that debate process can really filter people out. We'll see.
The question is, will there be a Tea Party nominee for the presidency?
You could read this as really bad news for Sarah Palin or for the Tea Party people, because this is partly the reason that the Republicans don't control the Senate is because Christine O'Donnell and Sharon Angle and Colorado and what was the other race? Anyway, Alaska. Lisa Murkowski. Yeah. They failed to win key races. Delaware should have been a walkover for the Republicans, and Christine O'Donnell managed to spectacularly lose it. And even where they did win, like Rand Paul in Kentucky, he managed to switch a 30-point lead into an 11-point lead by the end of the process after people were stomped on and all sorts. Or you could read this as actually, this is the group which has re-energized this Republican Party, which was completely written off in 2008. It almost seems a long time ago now, but we were saying, this party is nowhere. They've got no idea. They've got no plan. They've got no leader. They've got no rudder. They've no idea what's going on. They're irrelevant to the 21st century. What a difference 2 years makes, and that's partly the Tea Party resurgence.
Bill, the questioner is saying, what about the Tea Party in 2 years as a presidential nominee from the Republican side?
Well, that will depend upon the role of the party in the Congress over the next 2 years. There are going to be real tensions within the party from people, particularly like Rand Paul, who's really a libertarian, not a Republican. The more bizarre Tea Party candidates lost, and I suspect if you ask Tom privately, he'll say that he's probably glad that O'Donnell lost and that Angle lost. But there's tensions there. There's also a modest revival of moderate Republicans, right. 3 House seats in New York. So a lot depends. There's only one candidate from the Senate, though, and that's Thune of North Dakota. All the others are former governors, pretty much. If Palin should win, I don't think there's a chance of a snowball in the proverbial place that she would win. You're more likely to find someone who will co-opt the Tea Party rhetoric and impulse. And one to watch for the vice presidential nomination would be Rubio from Florida, for example, who's a very attractive candidate and is from a large state as well.
You're all telling us, I think, to look to the Republican Party as a giant coalition, perhaps with an explosive convention in 18 months' time? or just will it be done in smoke-filled rooms?
Generally, the Republican convention is very controlled.
Okay. This gentleman isn't.
Frank Jackson, World Disarmament Campaign. Although we're not discussing peace issues here tonight,
we've got a few. We might still.
Yeah, but surely one of the lessons which comes directly out of this is that no one individual can, no matter how charismatic, how wonderful the speechmaker he or she is, can actually really change the society in the way that I, for one, want to change it. That it really has to be a grassroots movement. And one of the besetting sins of the left and the peace movement in general is they're always looking for a messiah, and I'm afraid Obama has turned out not to be a messiah, unfortunately, but I never really thought he would be.
Right, okay, thank you. And can we go to the back, the lady second in, and then you're a panellist, so your question had better be very good, because you're speaking in the next half. Right, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Roanne.
Hold it closer.
Sorry, my name is Roanne, I'm a student. But I want to direct this to Dr. Thomas Grant. There's a lot of attention to the Tea Party patriots. I wanted to ask you, what do you believe defines you as a Republican, and what defines a Tea Party patriot?
Well, thanks for that question, Rahan. It's a good question. Tea Party's been a matter of tremendous interest, especially overseas, for the last couple of months. When you say Tea Party patriots, that actually, I mean, it discloses one of the problems with talking about the Tea Party, and that is it's not a single organization. There is an organization called Tea Party Patriots. There's the Tea Party Express. There's the Tea Party this, the Tea Party that. It's a multi-headed thing without any single head office, without any boss, without any chairman. It's not a political party. It's a group of citizens, or many groups of citizens in different communities, different places, and depending on which Tea Party rally you descended upon and which person you approached and talked to, you'd get quite different answers as to what matters for that particular type of Republican, which actually means to say Tea Party Republican doesn't even define a very cohesive category. A lot of Tea Party people are like myself in the sense that we're concerned that you cannot have trillion-dollar deficits ad infinitum. And we're concerned, too, that Republicans started this. The first trillion-dollar deficit was our fault. And now the Democratic-controlled Congress and President did us one better and almost got up to $2 trillion and no end in sight. Now, that's something that excites a lot of Republicans. We're excited about the fact government really gets very intrusive, a lot of regulation, a lot of involvement in business, and we think that generally people do really great things when you let them go off and do their own thing.
Like bankers?
Depends on what you mean. I mean, has the banking sector been a healthy, 100% positive thing over the last decade? Of course not. Of course not.
We'll let the audience decide. But there wasn't a very government can regulate the banks. Government was asleep, and the banks stole the money.
Oh, wait a minute. I mean, the crisis that erupted over marginal lending had a lot to do with government policy that said you've got to lend money so more people can own houses.
Okay,
so that was a public policy decision as well as a private industry decision.
Abdallah, to you. And would you like to ask a question?
2 points I would like to make very quickly. The first one is that as a citizen of the world, I feel discriminated against being affected by the outcome of American elections without having to vote in it. And I think every one of us has to have a say one way or another. But the main point in my question is I feel that Obama has been punished for adopting the stimulus approach and not the cutting approach. And even the people in the upper echelon of income, whom he supported by saving the banks, they did not forgive him and wanted to punish him as well as much as the people who voted for him to come.
Let's start with you, Bill. Felicity, do we lose you at past?
Yes.
Okay, so it's 4 minutes. You can.
And me as well.
Oh, we lose you both. Well, would you like to answer that and give us your closing thoughts?
I think that's a very apt point. There's one thing to remember about Obama. Yes, I think he did not do an effective job of shaping the message, but there's something else. One of the reasons that Franklin Roosevelt could act so precipitously is that the Depression had begun in the first year of Hoover's administration, so they had 3.5 years of Hoover and the efforts to deal with it ineffectively that built up an enormous impulse for change. One of the ironies of the success of Bush's program of TARP to bail out the banks and of Obama's stimulus to create better than 3 million jobs, according to the Congressional Budget Office, one of the ironies of its success is that it undercut the political appeal that the president would have. American people are notoriously impatient, and yet when we've got the kind of crisis that we had, not simply a recession, which you've had many times and gradually climb out of, nor a financial crisis, which we often have, but which often doesn't spill over into the larger economy, but both together. And when you have that, as you did in the 1930s and as you did this time, the recovery is very slow, very tortuous, very difficult, and very fragile. And the American people's patience just ran out. And it was, as I say, an election of frustration, not one of overt ideology.
Felicity?
I think a lot about this election was about the economy. I mean, this is the principle. We can sort of talk about Obama's communication problem, or a fringe movement on the right, or problems political problems for Obama's healthcare issues. But actually, it's about the economy. And if the economy recovers and it's going well in 2 years' time, Obama will get back in. If it's doing badly still, if people are still out of work, then he'll be punished by the electorate. That's how these things go. It really is almost, I would say, as simple as that. And I think that the problem for Obama is that his message this time round has been, oh, well, it would have been a lot worse if I hadn't done this. And that's a pretty difficult message to sell, because that doesn't mean very much to people, especially if you look at the statistics. Something like 40–50% of people have lost their jobs, or know somebody who has, or they've lost their homes, or know somebody who has. You know, that's a hell of a lot of people who feel personally affected and worried about the future. I think 90% of people are worried about the future. And that's not a good position for anybody who's in charge of a country. So I think that the key to Obama's victory is finding a way of forging some kind of economic strategy with the Republican House, which means that he can emerge with a country that's on a surer and sounder footing. And I think a lot of the Republicans certainly are looking to our coalition government's cutting approach to see how that fares in this sort of microcosm of Britain, so they can sort of have a little test case to see whether, you know, that has any political benefits for them in 2 years' time.
Just one parting shot. In the last 8 months, private sector job creation has been at 50 to 60%. More jobs created in the last 8 months than in all 8 years of George Bush's tenure. It's not enough. It's not enough to take us out of the recession. It's not enough to recover, to handle just the growth in the size of the working population. But nonetheless, it's moving in the right direction, and it's not 750,000 jobs being lost every month as it was when we came into office in January 2009.
And let's not forget that Bill Clinton, by working with the Republican Congress, which was blocking his agenda, by adapting his policies and moving to the centre, bounced back and won re-election in 1996.
Right, now, Tom, you can respond to this for 5 more minutes. We're going to lose you, but thank you very much indeed. It's difficult. We asked you to do it in 25 minutes, but thank you, Felicity, and thank you, Bill, very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can unplug yourself. So I propose, as they leave, we'll do 5 more minutes on the US, including with Tom here, but we haven't discussed policy. So I'll look for your guidance in the room. But Tom, would you like to make some predictions about the economy, your hope and your fear, and what policy would you like to compare here, the cutting that Felicity was mentioning in the UK, with what in the US? Would you like to see cuts in the US? Does the Republican Party want to see that?
Well, Paddy, one difficulty, I think Felicity's absolutely right, that the economy can be one of the prime drivers behind outcomes at national level in the political system of any country, and of course of the United States. If the economy rebounds in a historically meaningful way, that gives President Obama a tremendous head of steam as he seeks, as we expect him to seek, re-election in 2012. If the economy fails to rebound, of course, that's going to be delivered onto his desk and the voters will take it out on him. One of the things that Reagan did in the 80s that was extraordinarily successful on the communications front, I think to an extent earlier this evening I was deprecating the role of communications and emphasizing policy. By the same token, economics is a deeply psychological business. I'm not an economist or a psychologist, but it's pretty clear that if people think things are bad, things get worse. And if people have that sort of pessimism, which prevents them from investing, prevents them from getting back into the economy, then you're not going to have the type of robust recovery that you need. Reagan was sort of made fun of in the early 80s for talking about how good things were going to be when things were getting worse and worse. And in 1982, we had a bruising Republican setback in the congressional elections, but there was a certain positive effect that his
call it a sunny disposition. That sounds like a trivial thing, sunny disposition, but it really, I think it made some difference in encouraging people to get the economy going again, just in the psychological dimension. In that sense, President Obama would have to take Bill's advice and get back out there on the hustings and recover that ability that he seems to have had 2 years ago to really motivate people, get people upbeat and excited. If he doesn't have that anymore, then it's hard to see how his input is going to help the economy at all. On the side of policy, yeah, I think there are a lot of thinkers within my party who are looking at the deficit this year, looking at budget projections in the years ahead, and they're coming to grips with the fact that if you do not have if you do not take a very hard look at some of the entitlement programs, if you don't take a hard look at the entire array of public expenditures, you're just not going to get this beast in harness and under control, and it's going to go on and on. So I think people are very much aware of what the coalition in this country is tackling, and the approach that it has taken. And I think there are a lot of people in Washington, especially in the new Republican, the coming Republican majority that will be sworn in the next Congress, who are looking at that as as a signpost for how things might be done. It's hard to do it.
So we're like a little laboratory, little guinea pig country. No, you didn't say that, but I did. But I'm going.
I'd say you're the brave trailblazers.
The brave trailblazers. So I would summarise that we heard everyone telling us to look to the Republicans as a giant coalition and not to get carried away by this being a historic election in the sense that it's happened to Reagan and Clinton and Eisenhower and everyone else, Roosevelt. But on the other hand, we're now being watched to see if they should cut programs in the US. So that was some things I'll take away. I propose that we move to Yemen, unless you, as the audience, want to ask Tom a closing question, because we're obviously very glad that Tom's here, but I'd like to take the lead from you. But I know we're also interested in Yemen in the room. Yes, one more. You're very greedy. It better be better than your last question.
Incredibly, very quick question. I just wondered how the Republican leadership were talking about handling the, sorry about that, Tea Party influx, whether they were more worried about this new movement hijacking the Republican Party, or whether they were more worried about whether, in fact, it would force some Republicans to side with the Democrats. How are they sort of thinking about it?
One thing, one caveat about the so-called, there are a lot of candidates who are really genuinely newcomers to the process, who you can really say these are Tea Party candidates from start to finish. But there are a lot of candidates who the Tea Party likes and has endorsed, but who are not themselves fresh newcomers, but are quite established people, who will be identified as Tea Party supported candidates, but are actually very familiar with the process and are not the type who are going to purposely overturn the vote just to overturn the vote. On the other hand, if people see policies that just aren't working, I don't think that this new Congress is going to be shy about saying, hey, stop, we have to take a different approach. So I think whilst there are going to be some freshmen in the incoming Congress who are just really new to Washington and new to the political system, by and large, the decision making is going to take place in a rational, sensible way. And again, if you're told that any given candidate is a Tea Party candidate, well, look at the history of that particular individual and make a judgment on a case-by-case basis. I think the Tea Party is very significant, but because it's so interesting, that we tend to exaggerate just how big its impact has been.
Do you believe that?
The Republican leadership is not thinking about it at all.
The
Republican leadership isn't thinking about it at all.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I think if you look at what Mr. Boehner was saying, it was either early this morning or late yesterday, I think we're thinking about it a lot. What he was saying was, we're not going to be celebrating. Don't break open the champagne. This is not the time for that. We're going to have to really think about how we're going to work together to get things done as a new majority in the House. I think that tone, plus the substance of what he was saying, was very telling. And it actually reveals that, yeah, I think people are thinking very hard now in Washington how to make our new majority work for the country.
Okay. Now, Tom Grant, thank you very much. And you kept your peace, but thank you very much for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Kind of you. Thank you. Do unplug yourself. Now, could we have Abdallah welcome up? Ginny, is Ginny here? Oh, good. And James, I met you earlier, and we've got a Skype commentator who we could perhaps get wobble the wires to Yemen. That's good. We can look at your emails. Why don't you have any from Nigeria in there like I do? Here, have a seat here. I'm Paddy. Nice to see you. Yes, it is. Do come here, Abdallah. Yes. James on the end. Yes, it is. Here you are. Nice to see you again. So while we're waiting, we're doing a call to... Look, there's someone in Sana. Or is that you, Millie? Oh. We thought we'd begin with a voice from Yemen. And if not, we've obviously got plenty of others to begin with.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone. Would you like to say hello?
So as you can imagine, getting into a wireless internet connection in Yemen is not the easiest task.
Tom, welcome. Would you introduce yourself? Tom, give us the state of play with the Yemeni security drama.
Hi there. So my name's Tom Finn. I've been working as a journalist at the Yemen Times for the past 3 months. What's the question you want to know about increased security?
Yes.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I can. We have been following the situation from London.
Yes, I can.
We have been following the situation from London. You're in the capital. What are people saying about the clampdown on Yemen?
What are people saying about the clampdown on Yemen? And how do you describe the situation in the capital?
Okay, got the question. In reality, there's been very little changes taking place in the capital. The only visual changes you can see are in increasing traffic jams, because the police have been stopping more cars and searching people. The only time I've heard anyone on the street talk about this issue was a bus driver who was complaining about the number of times his bus had been stopped and how it was costing him lots of money. Quite frankly, most Germans have more things to worry about, as you can imagine. A couple of weeks ago, a block just on the corner from where I work was burnt to the ground by armed tribesmen who had bulldozers and guns because of a land dispute that had been going on for 10 years. I got shot in a restaurant last week. I mean, quite frankly, these sort of big international dramas don't really play out much on the streets. Just one other thing I'll say is that the thing that people are most concerned about is that Yemen is going to find itself isolated. In the last week, I think 6 countries have banned incoming cargo from Yemen. America, Canada, Germany, France, Netherlands and UK. And so there's an increased worry that there's going to be the real impact on Yemenis is that people are going to stop investing in the country. I spoke to a political analyst today who was saying how relieved he was that the packages that were sent to Germany and Greece recently didn't originate in Yemen, because it showed to the world that Yemen is the only country where this sort of thing happened. So, quite frankly, the main way is that Yemen's going to find itself isolated.
Right. Thank you for that, Tom. Would you listen in and indicate in about 10 minutes?
Would you listen in and indicate in about 10 minutes? I'll come back to you.
Fine.
Thank you. And would you go kindly introduce yourself, James?
Thank you.
Can you cut that down, Millie? James, would you kindly introduce yourself and give us your own sit rep, and we'll go down the panel. Not too long to open us up.
Sure. James Brandon, currently head of research at the Quilliam Foundation in London, a counter-extremism think tank. I began getting interested in Yemen almost 8 years ago when I studied Arabic there, 2002, journalist then again in 2004, 2005, before moving into the think tank kind of world. In terms of what's going on in Yemen, I think it's a mess, basically, Yemen. And I think the thing to remember is it's been a mess for a long time and it's going to continue to be a mess for a long time.
And do you think there's more extremism in Yemen now than 5 years ago?
I don't think so. I mean, I remember when I first went to Yemen in 2002, and everyone was saying Yemen's on the brink of disaster, this country's about to fall off the cliff, about to become the next Afghanistan, there's terrorists everywhere, there's Al-Qaeda everywhere. And now the same situation pretty much. We haven't seen a lot of change. I mean, it's in the news again, it'll be in the news again sometime soon, I'm sure.
My name is Abdallah Homouda. I'm a writer and journalist. I have been visiting Yemen and in touch with Yemen for many years. I feel that Yemen is one of the most mismanaged countries in the world. The people are one of the nicest people you can ever meet. Some people from the West see them as belonging to the biblical era. I see them as belonging to the heart of humanity. Unfortunately, they have been unlucky, the most unlucky people to be ruled by a government like what we see now. And more to come. The fact that they are associated with Al-Qaeda these days or with civil wars or instability, it is all due to the mismanagement. Unfortunately, economic resources are depleting and things are getting more difficult for the future.
I'm Ginny Hill. I run the Yemen Forum at Chatham House, but I took over from James actually when he left as a freelance reporter, and I was based out there as a journalist for some time. I think you're right about this sort of state collapse scenario being a kind of motif that keeps reoccurring, but the problem here at the moment is that oil revenues are really falling away, and that peak oil was in 2002. And the money that's been holding the state together, but also the patronage networks, the informal networks, is kind of falling away, and there isn't the sustainable economic situation to keep this thing floating. But just a point on the security agenda. Yes, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is based in Yemen. And yes, there are Yemenis active in the structure, and there have been attacks, a lot of attacks on Yemeni security services actually in the last year and increasingly in recent months. But if you think about the attacks that have taken place outside of Yemen that have got all this attention, it's not Yemeni nationals that are involved in the problem. The Detroit attack was a Nigerian, and the attack over the weekend was a Saudi bomber, and the attack on the Saudi prince last summer was also a Saudi bomber. So I think there's an issue here around our attitudes towards geography and space and identity.
Right, well, thank you very much indeed for beginning. Again, we're running it as a public meeting, so I'm looking for you to catch my eye if you'd like to. Yes, great, what a lovely beginning. So 1, 2. But please wait for the microphone, because there are millions watching you around the internet.
I'd like you to outline what I think is a problem in Yemen as far as we understand, the difference between the south and the north of Yemen. And if we can get an understanding of that, and understand Western interference to do with oil, if we can just get a little bit more of a background based on, I have a rough idea of it, but if you could just explain that to us, that would be helpful.
Let's go in reverse order then. Ginny?
I mean, I don't know whether are you going to do the history or are you going to do the...
I would do whatever you don't do.
Okay. I mean, I think that this is partly around the process of kind of the state formation and the situation after unification, but it's also around mismanagement and the feeling in the south that people are really suffering because of the economic mismanagement. And I think that the economic mismanagement is a problem that people in the north face as well, but because there's a different history, it gives people an idea and a sense of identity which is different.
Give us a beginner's guide. Okay. Ginny's gone right in with detail, and she's clearly wrong to do that. We need you to tell us, beginners start here.
The two parts of Yemen, North and South, united in May 1990 after about 15 years of wars and peace, trying to get together in whichever way possible. They got together in the most undesirable way, integrated, unified state. There were talks about confederation or federation or whatever, so that each part keeps some kind of identity until things amalgamate in the nice way. What happened is that Ali Abdallah Saleh and the then leader of the South, Ali Salim al-Bid, went through a tunnel in Aden, disagreeing in the beginning and agreeing at the end, and no one knows what happened during that small journey. democracy in a country is based on the balance of power. The two parties in the north and south shared the power in the first 4 years, and it was not to the liking of Ali Abdallah Saleh, and the people of the south of the Socialist Party did not feel that they are getting through with their agenda as well. War erupted in April, May until July 1994 and ended that kind of unity, and the Southerners now feel that they are associated, occupied, etc. The South has 2/3 of the land, most of the oil resources, and 3 million people. The North has a small mountainous terrain with very small oil resources and tribal structure, well armed to the teeth, and that is unfair to the people of the South. And Ali Abdallah Saleh does not like it any other way, and he wants to bequeath it to his son as well.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that a little bit, I think sometimes it's useful to see Yemen as divided into a south, a middle, and a north. If you look at the south around Aden, they've got a very distinct history, a very distinct culture. And at one point it was a relatively advanced, sophisticated society with good education. And that's now completely collapsed. And as Ginny said, there's now a narrative that has collapsed, not just because of mismanagement, but because of deliberate kind of discrimination against them by the ruling party. If you look at the middle of the country, the area around Sana'a, around Taiz, it's a bit more prosperous. There's big problems of lack of jobs, lack of security, but it's relatively calm, relatively prosperous. In the north, you have a part of the country that was never really developed, never had any industry, never had any infrastructure, and they've got a more assertive kind of Shia identity as well. And so like the south, they've got a narrative of persecution and victimhood that explains a lot of the troubles up there, basically. And so you get this kind of triple tension within Yemen. Lots of people having different attitudes to the state, to the government, and their own regional sets of grievances and problems.
But did I understand correctly that the oil resources are depleting anyway? Is that what you were saying as well? So that would be taken out of the equation, presumably. So
Yeah, and they are saying the oil is depleting. Would you like to add anything? That microphone doesn't work. I mean, I know they normally don't, but that one's unusually useless. And then you can answer that.
Did you hear me?
No, it was about, you want to know were you happy with what you heard about North and South?
Yes.
So was I. And now you want to know about oil.
Did I understand correctly that the oil resources were depleting?
Yes.
So would that take certain things out of the
No, it means people are fighting over a smaller and smaller share of the pie, and people's expectations haven't adjusted properly. But I just want to add one thing, is that until very recently, this kind of unique democratic structure in Yemen had been holding all these really disparate bits together. But there's such a growing sense of frustration now that the government and the parliamentary structures are not being able to manage people's expectations, that there's a shift towards violence.
Okay, now to the back. Do we have a microphone?
Yeah,
coming. Sorry to rush you. I'm not really that sorry, because we knew we were coming here for a week. Sorry, Pambera.
Not working.
No.
Wait.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Right. Okay, the lady with the headscarf on the end of the pew. Just to mix my metaphors.
My name is Khalas Al-Qurashi, Yemeni Media Center. It's a question, the gentleman is in the internet was talking about isolating Yemen. I think it's right. There is a plot against Yemen to isolate Yemen by the Al-Qaeda. And it's Al-Qaeda is more business from outsider than insider. Do you think, are you agree with me or not?
Take that. You mean that Al-Qaeda is plotting to isolate Yemen, or the West is isolating Yemen because of Al-Qaeda?
No, Al-Qaeda is planning to, plotting or making conspiracies about Yemen, against Yemen, to isolate Yemen, to get control of the country.
No, I tend to disagree with that. What I'd like to tell you is that the situation in Yemen and the lack of the government authority outside the urban centers leaves a room for any organization to take place and to flourish. Al-Qaeda is there because the environment allows it to. There is no conspiracy whatsoever. It is the failure of the state which is allowing Al-Qaeda, as it is allowing the tribal chiefs to be supreme in their own region, and as you know.
So should we see, those of us who've followed Al-Qaeda through its, well, I haven't followed it as closely as you, does it tell us Al-Qaeda is weak because it's gone to a very failing state? Or does it tell us Al-Qaeda is strong because it's chosen just the right place to incubate? In other words, if Yemen is failing, does that tell our friend and me that it shows this is a weak organisation that needs a weak host? Or does it tell us it's a strong strategic organisation that knows exactly which geography in the world to go to?
I think it's actually a mix of those things. If you look at Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, where it came from, as Jenny said, a lot of the leadership are actually Saudi. The organisation is actually mainly Saudi in many ways. And these people are people who were basically defeated in Saudi Arabia in 2003, 2006. The Saudi Arabians basically destroyed Al-Qaeda there. They moved to Yemen. And in a way, Yemen for Al-Qaeda is the path of least resistance. It's a place where government's very weak. There's opportunity for them to exploit local grievances.
Okay, and to you. Yeah, hello.
Hi, Umul Chowdhury. I was just wondering if the panel could also comment on the Qat culture and the water resources issue in Yemen, just to make it a little bit interesting.
You go.
Well, the cat market is one of the things in Yemen that works really, really well as a structure. It's incredibly efficient.
Ginny, can you go back to first principles? What is the cat market? How much does it cost to buy cat? When you buy it, what does it do to you? And then nothing.
So you know.
Well, it's a kind of narcotic plant that you chew. It takes a long time. You chew it all afternoon. It fills up in your cheek, so you look like you have half a tennis ball in your face. And I don't really chew it a huge amount. I take little bits, so I've never had a massive impact, but it calms you down, it removes your hunger, time slows down.
You are smiling very broadly as you tell us, as you talk about it.
But the thing that's really lovely about it is how sociable the whole process is. It's a kind of form of social bonding, the whole process of chewing gas. But the markets are, you have to eat this plant fresh. It has to be picked in the morning and you eat it in the afternoon. And this is a network in Yemen that functions really, really efficiently.
Thank you. I think. Can I? Qat consumes more than half the water resources of Yemen and constitutes something like 40% of the grey economy, the whole economy, GDP. So it is taking water from more crops and fruits which can feed the country and occupying land as well. This with regard to the water resources. With regard to oil resources, it went down in 5 years from nearly 500,000 barrels a day to half that, 250,000, and within 5 to 7 years it could be depleted completely. Unfortunately, Yemen is in a losing way.
So should aid agencies drop cat from the sky by parachute to save water resources of Yemen rather than give guns and maybe medicines?
Unfortunately,
aid agencies don't give guns.
No, well said.
Well, in guns in Yemen are there. I mean, and in great supply. So don't worry about that. Qat is part of the national culture. There is no important decision is taken except in a maqyal, that is the meeting where the qat is chewed. Unfortunately, this is a waste of resources, waste of time, waste of health, waste of everything. But and that session could continue from 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 7, 8, 10 in the evening, and then you have a meal and start drinking alcohol, which is called tafsikh. And the meeting continues until the early hours as well. A great deal of waste. Unfortunately, this is the national culture. There is no leader strong enough to say a stop and lead by action.
Right, you're shaking your head, so we'll come to you. Would you like to respond? You raised the question. Have you still got the microphone? So here it comes.
I'm sort of more interested in what does that mean for the culture, the structure of government. You didn't really talk about what would the water resources issue be like within the next 3, 5, 10 years. And what could that mean? Maybe James, you could comment on this.
Yeah, I mean, the cat issue just makes every other problem in Yemen worse. It makes the lack of resources so much worse because so much of the water in the country goes on growing this drug. It makes the economy worse because they're not producing anything that the rest of the world wants. There's no exports as a result. So, you know, it does make things a lot worse. But I think, you know, in some ways it prevents extremism being worse as well because people have got this outlet, this social kind of release mechanism.
They're drugged.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're drugged in our country as well, but by alcohol and booze and other. I'm not being, you know, anything other than just straightforward here, am I? And then you're shaking your head. Water resources, oil's depleting. What's going to happen to water? Are there sources which haven't been tapped? Could aid agencies find new aquifers? Are they there?
Well, one of the problems for Western governments engaging with Yemen and trying to encourage reform and working in the aid sector is that power in Yemen is not really fully structured through the government. And I think the CAT issue really shows this. It's about relationships. Decisions are not taken in government structures. This is not a country where government structures are very strong. It's all about relationships and informal networks. And that makes it very difficult for people to come in and implement any kind of technical reform program around water or whatever issue it is.
Are you getting an answer to your water question?
Well, when is it going to finish?
What's going to happen to water?
The deeper down you go, you can still get the water, but it costs more money and it's more polluted and it requires more treatment. So it's about economics, actually. It's about the price that people can pay for water, because it is there. It just gets more expensive to use it the deeper down the aquifers go. And the drill rigs, the water that's coming out of the ground for CAT is providing a lot of money for people. There's a lot of profit being made out of this. So it's also about the way power is divided at the regional level and the local level and the people that are making money out of the CAT crops.
That's interesting. So we used to say in this country, where there's muck, there's brass. And in with the CAT situation, it's where there's water, there's brass.
Yes.
Right. You were shaking your head earlier. Why? Don't worry, they never work.
It's only a comment about tafsir. And I don't think all the people in Yemen, they do tafsir with alcohol. And I don't agree with you really, because maybe you met 10 or 3 people or 5 people, but not all the majority.
I know not all of them drink alcohol.
Not
I
all
agree
of them
with
drink.
you. Okay,
Okay, he's conceded that not all of them. Do you drink?
I don't shoot.
You don't?
I'm against.
You're against the CAT and the drink? Right. You're in the wrong room. Now, we'll come to the front, because the rest of them, every time they mention it, they can't stop laughing. Now, would you like to raise your question? I don't think you should wait for a microphone.
Just about the recent drone attacks, I'd like to know, can they be justified under Yemeni laws?
Right, the question is about drone attacks.
Yeah.
Can they be justified under Yemeni laws? Now, who's starting? Ginny, why don't you start? We'll go down the panel with this. And would you also say what the drone attacks are? Because I know there's a bit disputed.
Well, there's been some quite good reporting in the US newspapers since January about the scale of military cooperation between Pentagon Special Forces, the CIA and the Yemeni military. And it's clear that there has been American involvement in these strikes in Shabwa and Abiyan. I don't know about Yemeni law, and I know that in America you can find lawyers who will justify this process if you're invited in by the host government.
Do you know where they struck, what they did, who they hit?
They struck once in Shabwa, once in Abiyan. Before that, they struck twice, and they got one leader, mainly a Shahri, one of the leaders of Al-Qaeda. But the two in Shabwa and in Abiyan caused the scores of civilian death, which was the cause of a prayer in Yemen. The situation is that the Yemeni government says that it has nothing to do with the drones. And sometimes they own up to it in a certain way, but they say that their own air force did it, and which it didn't to start with. But they don't know, they are not part of the decision, and this kind of cooperation is disputed, and there is some kind of discontent in the country because of that.
James?
In terms of like the actual legal issue, Yemen is pretty much in a state of war with a lot of its population, including the Al-Qaeda parts. And I think the drone strikes is America working as an ally of Yemen, probably is how they regard it. And so in pure Yemeni terms, I think it probably would be legal.
So there's no like presidential consent to it, basically.
The question there is, was there any presidential consent for drone attacks?
I think there haven't actually yet been any drone strikes. What has happened is that there have been cruise missile strikes from US warships, and that the Pentagon and the CIA are now arguing for drone strikes. And we're going to wind up seeing the outcome of this decision over the next few months.
And would everyone in the room and the panel address what kind of argument we'd be having had one of these cargo bombs gone off, God forbid? The fact that we're having the discussion in the meeting tonight, would anyone in the room, panel or audience, like to say what the niceties of drone attacks and cruise missiles and so on would be post a God forbid, an attack?
Well, I would like to say that the drone attacks are one of many things that ought to be totally banned. It really is inevitably indiscriminate, like so many. In fact, bombing altogether is indiscriminate, and there's a very strong argument on the basis of international humanitarian law that all such attacks ought to be banned completely. We've made some progress in some respects. Cluster bombs, for example, it's a treaty. Landmines were banned a few years ago, although still not every country has signed up to it.
Do you say that drones are the landmine of our time?
Yes, that would be a good way of expressing it. It's a continuing of the development of technology, and I'm a scientist and an engineer myself. Yes. It's a continuation of the misuse of science and technology for killing rather than for the benefit of humanity, and it's a general trend that we really need to reverse.
And you can keep the microphone, and we'll let the panel respond to you. And do feel that you can sit if you wish. We're not going to run you away. Would you respond here? He's saying Yemen is a front in a new type of war against the civilian. I know it's happening in Pakistan, but we know you fight extremism. It must produce sort of extremism responses. Would you respond to our friend?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of separate issues. I mean, firstly, drones in themselves are just one weapon like other weapons. You might be anti-war in general, but there's not much difference between a drone strike on, a country's enemies versus an artillery strike, for example. But there's a separate issue, making sure you hit the right people. If you're going to be in a war situation, you have to make sure you just target combatants. The idea of just firing drones and taking out a bunch of civilians is completely...
But that is exactly the point. That the more you get away from the hand-to-hand fighting, the more you are going to have indiscriminate and so-called collateral victims and so on.
Are you against drone strikes in general, or just ones that hurt civilians?
I'm against drone strikes in general because they can't distinguish. The idea that, and again speaking as an engineer and scientist, the idea that you can discriminate is absolute nonsense.
I agree with that, because an attack in Ma'rib caused the death of the brother of the governor, and the governor himself was injured, and that was a mistaken attack, friendly fire, call it whatever you like. So I agree.
Yeah. I think it depends a lot on the drone strike. There's some drones, when they look at it, they see a bunch of people who are in the process of carrying out an attack, and they carry out a drone strike. If they're doing that, I think in a war situation, it might be okay. But obviously what is wrong is just firing drones into schools or mosques or whatever. That's a separate issue.
Okay, so we took a drone question to do with Yemen, but we haven't got too much time just to focus on that. Here's another question here about the situation in Yemen overall, and we can come back to some issues at the end.
I was just going to respond to your question about what would have happened if the bombs had gone off. Then arguably Yemen wouldn't necessarily be in the frame at all, because the aeroplanes might have disappeared over God knows where, and there might be more on the way. So it's actually arguably worse for Yemen that the bombs actually didn't go off.
Can I come in? This situation is new, and there are so many views about it in the Middle East. Some people who may adhere to the conspiracy theory say that this is timed for the American election to help Obama to appear as a strong man against terror, etc., at this time. And some see this as something like farce, because this may be the product of a third generation Al-Qaeda internet people who try to do something to create fuss. And if Al-Qaeda is doing this and failing from Abdul Muttalib coming last Christmas, then Al-Qaeda is failing. This is the judgment. Some people raise another idea, since when Yemen has become a supplier of printers, cartridges to Jewish synagogues in America. I mean, who is advanced to supply whom? I mean, there are so many questions like this. I don't think this has to pass like this. This will need careful study in the future. But it has to be understood within the context of a fragile state who has so many problems in the north, in the south, in the middle, economic, political, etc., even within the ruling family themselves.
I mean, I think the most interesting thing about this story is actually the role of Saudi intelligence. Because the whole thing,
telling Yemen and telling America, and Ali Abdullah Saleh took a great exception to that, and we'll never forget it to the Saudis.
and this was a former Guantanamo detainee who had gone back to. I mean, I think that the extent of Saudi intelligence networks in Yemen, the way this is going to work in the future, the presence of all these Saudis in Yemen is a really important aspect of this story, and has really been overlooked.
Well, would you like to give us a little briefing just before we lose that thought? What's been overlooked and why is it crucial? Because we're all here for a briefing. What would you tell us to mark in our mind from you? We know you spent years living there and studying it. What was the point you wanted to make?
That tackling this problem with drone strikes and kinetic interventions, as being a polite way of saying this, is potentially going to wind up causing enormous tensions in Yemen. Not because people will then wind up running out and joining Al-Qaeda, but because the sense that the government is not delivering for people is going to get tied up with the sense that the government is allowing the Americans to come here and do what they want. And I think that is a problem in this situation where it's so fragile. An intelligence-based approach is less controversial at that kind of level in terms of flashpoint and people's feelings. It does create problems. It creates a sense about conspiracy theory. It creates political tensions. But dropping bombs on people, it just creates such a strong emotional backlash that it's feeding into this feeling about the government not living up to people's expectations.
Because most governments are there to give security to the people.
Well, the sense is that the feeling is that the Yemeni government is doing the American government's bidding, and there's such strong resentment against American policy in the region. It's a country with 50% literacy rates. You know, the analysis here is very basic.
I'm Brian Condon. Thank you. I want to say two things. The first thing is, I've now realised the depth of my ignorance about Yemen. Thank you very much for that. And both from the panel and the audience, I now know much more than I ever thought I would know in a very short time. That's fantastic. And the second thing is, this is not new. The idea of somebody using the infrastructure, the failed infrastructure of a state, to attack another state without that state knowing is not new. So I like this. I like this bit of briefing about the intelligence aspects of it, and I think that's really important. And before the microphone came to me, I've kind of got a so what question. And my so what question is, so what should we do about this? You know, irrespective of whether the bombs went off or not, that's kind of immaterial in a way. So the so what is, what should we do? What should we influence our government, to the extent that we can influence it, to do? Both about the situation in Yemen and also about the fact that the infrastructure of trade has been attacked, both kind of psychologically and physically. That, you know, the fact that Greece decides to suspend air shipments for 48 hours, that's not connected with anything that happened in Yemen.
James?
What does it say about the integrity of that? I think that would be interesting for you to talk to us about.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, the problems in Yemen, there's a lot of different problems and they need a lot of different solutions. I think in the short term, stopping, say, packages coming out of Yemen might be a good thing, but in the long term, you need to encourage the Yemenis to begin a real reform process in this country. You need to get them to sort out their economic system as much as they can. You need to make the place more accountable to its people, proper democracy, not just pretend democracy, but stuff that makes people feel they have a stake in their own government.
Do you think that the UK has sorted out its own economic position? Do you think that, I mean, we're in the world's seventh, well, you don't, do you? The seventh largest economy. I mean, have we sorted out our economy?
Well, no, I mean, we haven't.
Well, then, what's your advice to our friend here is that Yemen's got to do that? Yeah. Well, how soon has it got to do that before the question, problem sorted out?
You've got to remember that we are sitting here in a failed state.
Yeah.
We have failed. our entire economy is bankrupt. Our total banking system has been completely destroyed.
Well, don't get onto the UK.
But yeah, so should we say here? Should we sit here and say, okay, Yemen, you've got to sort yourselves out, mates, because you're actually failed? Well, we have our own failure to deal with. You can't lay your failure on us.
But I don't think our failure, however bad it is the same scale as Yemen's failure. There's not 40% unemployment in the UK. There's not 50% illiteracy. I think a lot of the problems in Yemen to do with the economy are self-inflicted by the government. Huge corruption, huge nepotism. There's no encouragement of enterprise, there's no encouragement of education, none of these things. These are things that are solvable. Some things aren't solvable in Yemen, but some things are.
Well, the diagnosis of the failed state interests me very much, because in the Western country, people believe in the prevention of a disease, while in a country like Yemen, sometimes people don't go to the doctor unless they are on their deathbed. So there is a different criteria when you look at things, and I feel very bad about this. But unfortunately, this is the case. What I would like to do is to say is that in Yemen, it is a chronic problem and aggravated with dictatorship. Democracy is needed. Democracy in a tribal area, in a tribal environment, can be very good, or through the balance of power between the two parties between 1990 and 1994. In Yemen, there is about 40 political parties and 400 newspapers and all the facade of democracy. But the president interferes to get a very junior civil servant appointed somewhere by the phone. I mean, this is how things are done in Yemen, unfortunately.
Okay, so that's a very definite example. In the time that remains us, which is only about 7 minutes, would you kindly give us another briefing, which you may not be expecting? Will you give us some of the best, most vibrant, most exciting parts of Yemen, including 400 newspapers, and why are there 2 English language newspapers? And will you brief us on all the other stuff that we're not hearing? Life, love, literature, culture, history, humour, and will you do it in about 2 minutes? Because that's the priority here. Gloom for an hour, something good for 2 minutes. And would you start and tell us if you fell in love with the country or with a Yemeni as well? Be honest, but time is brief, but let's just deal with a little bit of that.
I had the best year of my life in Yemen. And I think Yemeni women is one of the best things about Yemen, actually.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. There's this saying about the Yemenis having Gelb Abiyad, the white heart. And I think this is so true. It's just such an amazing warmth and generosity amongst the families that I know in Yemen.
Well, the Yemeni people are very generous, and they think that people from outside Yemen know a lot about Yemen, so they come to ask me what I think of them, and I feel embarrassed. Yemen is like a school. The more I spend, the more I feel that I need to learn more. And with their generosity, some of the officials try to bribe me in so many ways. I decided to impose on them 5 items to bribe me with. Honey from Douan, lobster from Al-Mukalla, frankincense from Aden, Ganbiyat from Sana'a, and Ma'awiz from anywhere. And I said, after that, you cannot guarantee what I'm going to write on you.
Well, I think Yemen's really one of those places that from the outside looks a terrible, dark, dangerous, scary place. If you go there, it's fantastic. The people are wonderful, friendly and generous. And at the risk of sounding like the Yemeni tourist board, it's also got everything. It's got mountains, it's got beaches, it's got old cities, it's got everything. So if you ever get a chance, I advise everyone to go there.
Absolutely.
So we can have some more from the floor, the room, excuse me, and then we'll bring Tom back in where we began. I don't know. He's gone. He's gone to the cat market, I think. So I'm sorry about that, but I was very pleased we could go there at the beginning. And would anyone like to share anything about Yemen? Over here to our friend with the cut and water obsession, and then to you again, and then we'll get closing thoughts from the panel, and we'll end on time, which I know is astonishing. That doesn't work, so we won't get excited. Okay, go.
So we should be interested in Yemen outside of the Al-Qaeda terrorism issue. Like, why is there interest in Yemen on an international scale?
Why should we?
Anyone bother?
Well, you've seen the map, haven't you? You know where it is. Well, I mean, presumably, we as colonial powers were interested in it strategically, and so were the Ottomans, and so were the. Is that right? It's always been
That's
this
right.
strategic place.
Yes.
And is that a curse? Would Yemen have been better off if it was in France? You know, is its problem the strategic geography of the place sitting where it is?
Well, not all of Yemen was touched by the British, only the south. And having to deal with the north was another question. Actually, the British did some good things in the south. They helped build a proper state in the south, unlike the north. And one of the most difficult tasks for the people of the south, as they were organized in a properly organized party, was to try to take this experiment to the north. Unfortunately, it did not succeed.
Right, closing thoughts from you. And you were going to add something about Yemen. Here comes the microphone. We've mended it for you.
My great-grandfather is from Saudi Arabia, but he was a second son, so he moved to Yemen. And he had a wonderful time there. And my stepfather is from Texas, and he was head of Exxon Yemen about 10 years ago. Now, I have 2 children who have my blood and my family and my culture, but do you suggest I should take them to Yemen on holiday now?
If I say the wrong thing and something
No,
terrible
I'm just
happens,
genuinely curious, because we have lots of blood ties, but there's a lot of... This, I think, illustrates the issue with where you come from, how you look at it. You know more about it than I do, but I have lots of family who've been involved in it. How do I explain Yemen to my children?
Well, being the most foolish amongst the panel, I would say go, but be careful.
I mean, it is getting harder and harder for Western nationals to move around the country. They're getting confined to the capital. There are more and more attacks in the capital, but it's still not on the scale of Kabul. In terms of why should we care about Yemen, I mean, I think over the last 5 days in the news, we've seen an awful lot of reasons why we should care here about our own security, but there's 2 very strong reasons about why we should at least be thinking about what to do in Yemen for completely altruistic reasons. And one of them is to do with the level of poverty in Yemen. 7 million people, a third of the population, are food insecure. And the second thing is to do with conflict and how fragile this state is, because there's 2 areas of the country where there's conflict and there's potential for this to get worse and worse. So can we, as Western states, given all of the other restraints we face here around our own resources, actively engage in countries where they are struggling with really complex political issues that we don't have an affinity for, actually?
Okay, can I take that as your closing remark? And would you like to add, and then we'll end?
Yes, I would say any country faces a dilemma dealing with Yemen, because one has to define the line between helping and interfering in the internal affairs of the country. And the Yemeni government is not doing good to itself and to its people, to how much pressure you do exert on them in order to get things right, and how much inducement you need to do in order to urge them on the right way. And it is really a difficult question. This has been the dilemma for a long time.
Well, I would say that in some ways, the recent attempted terrorist attack could actually be a good thing, because it will encourage Western governments, the British government, the American government, to actually take an interest in this country, take an interest in its people, and actually say, okay, we're not going to go for short-term fixes here, we're not just going to go for drone strikes, we're actually going to help this country sort itself out, get itself back on track, back on the rails again. And that's, I think, something that we should do and should care about.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Speaking last is James Brandon from the Quilliam Foundation. Ginny Hill's nearest to me, and Abdallah Homouda is in the middle. And thank you very much, everyone, for making it such a lively meeting as well. Thank you very much.